Hi, this is Emily, your tech editor at fiatfiberarts.com, and I'm going to talk about gauge in this video. Gauge is one of the most important parts of crochet if you want things to be the right size. Now, since I deal with a lot of designers, and part of that involves taking something from a size small up to medium, large, XL, and beyond, gauge is very important to me. And I need to make sure that, or I need to trust that the designer is measuring gauge the proper way. So I've seen some videos about gauge, and I just wanted to make my own to make sure that we're covering the right information when it comes to gauge. First of all is to start with, I have my gauge swatch, I have my calculator, some pins, I have some paper to jot my notes down, and I have my trusty ruler. So let's talk about your swatch. Your swatch needs to be in the usually in the most dominant stitch that happens in your piece. If you this one is in waistcoat stitching or waistcoat, where the V's really sit inside of each other. If you have a pattern stitch for your piece, you can do a gauge swatch in that pattern and measure from the beginning of the pattern to the beginning of a pattern. Most gauge swatches are in an actual stitch like this, like half double crochet, single crochet, whatever it's going to be for your particular piece. A lot of the rules for measuring that gauge still applies even if you're measuring a pattern stitch. We're going to talk about the basics with this swatch right here. So it's all in a uniform stitch. The next thing is that it is in a form that is most usable. Now, a lot of times, if you gauges should be measured on a finally blocked piece of fabric after you've done your steam or wet blocking or finger blocking, however you're going to do it on that final piece. However, for my purposes, when it comes to sizing something, if you do a lot of things to your piece after the initial stitching that might alter the size, I need a gauge before you do that so that I can tell your user how much they need to stitch to get something the appropriate size. So I'll need something before you do anything else. If you do extra surface stitching on it, or you do something else that just alters the shape of this initial fabric, I need an unblocked gauge beforehand. So this is just a piece of 100% cotton. It's real easy to see our stitches, and we're going to go ahead and get started on the gauge. So the next thing is, my piece is larger than I need it to be. If you were going to measure a 4-inch gauge, I want you to make at least a 6-inch swatch. And that means 6 inches wide, 6 inches long for measuring a 4x4 gauge, because we are not measuring on the very edges. Your edges have a different type of gauge than the middle. The middle is where you're most consistent with your stitching, and edges are going to be funky for everyone. You can just see along here how it's kind of different. So we're measuring from the inside, hopefully an inch inside from either edge of your piece. So always stitch a much larger swatch than what you actually need to measure. So next we're going to get started with the measuring. You can see on this ruler that, I'm going to start to zoom in here, that this ruler doesn't exactly start at 0. Okay, it starts at the 0 mark is a little ways in from the edge. So I don't like going anywhere close to this end. I'm going to measure from the 1 to the 5. That's where I'm going to get my 1, 2, 3, 4 inches. So let's put that down on a section that you can see really clearly. And our next big rule is that we're going to be measuring from the same point in a stitch at the beginning to the same point in a stitch at the end. What I mean is, don't start from the beginning of one stitch to the end of another. If you start from the beginning of one stitch, like right here on that V, it's between them, to the ending of a stitch, it's different from starting from beginning to beginning. With these stitches, they're really close together, but something else that was larger that had space in between the stitches, like here I have some double crochet stitches, you know, and this is a kind of nice loose little bit right here. You want to be measuring from the beginning of one to the beginning of another at the end mark. Don't measure from the beginning to the end, because you will miss that space that occurs between the stitches. You want to include that space in your measurement. So when this is blocked out, you can imagine that there'd be some space between those stitches. And I want to really make sure that I get all of that. So you either go from middle to middle and you figure out how exactly you're going to mark that on a stitch, or you go from beginning to beginning to beginning, not beginning to end. Okay, I'm going to go from beginning to beginning so that we get that space. See the hole, see the space? You want to include that space in your measurement. All right, so down to it. Let's get our stitches marked. On this one, it is super easy for me to mark the inside of the V, the bottom of that V. I'm going to put that one on the 1, and I'm going to come down. This is another reason why I like pens, because, you know, if you accidentally shift your ruler, you know exactly which stitch you were starting at. And when I come down here to the 5 mark, I am not on the 5 mark. You can see that the end of one stitch is right here. Right there. Nope, this one. And the end of another stitch is right here. Those are on either side of my 5-inch mark. So at this point, you might think, oh, maybe it's just a half a stitch. I don't want to have to measure anymore. Well, let's see. If we did that, if we start counting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15. And the 15 is a little closer to it, but let's see what that difference really means. Okay, if we have 14 stitches over 4 inches, or we have 15 stitches over 4 inches, we're going to see what those gauge numbers come down to. And I'm going to show you why it might really matter in the end. There's my calculator. 14 divided by 4 is 3.5. And this is stitches per inch. Or 15 divided by 4 is 3.75. Okay, so if I'm calculating a, let's say double XL sweater for your garment, and at double XL, let's just imagine we want that size to be 25 inches across. I'm calculating 25 times this stitch gauge to see how many total stitches we need to get it 25 inches wide. So 3.5 stitches per inch times 25 inches equals 93.75 stitches. Okay, but 3.75 stitches per inch times 25 inches equal, whoa, nope, okay, wait a minute, I think I did that wrong. 3.5 times 25, this one's wrong. If you did your math with me, you're screaming at me right now. This is 87.5. This is 93.75. Okay, that's a big difference. 3.5 times 25 is 87.5. 3.75 times 25 is 93.75. So what am I supposed to tell you and tell your user as to how many stitches across their garment is? Is it 87, 88, 93, 94? What is it? You see how this little tiny bit, this little tiny difference has made a huge difference. So you might say, okay, well, whatever. Why don't we just budget and say 14 and a half per 4 inches. Okay, 14.5 divided by 4 is 3.625 stitches per inch. And that times our 25 equals 90.625. So that might be 90, might be 91 stitches. The point is, we don't exactly know because we didn't get an exact measurement. So we need to go back to our gauge. We didn't have the final measuring stitch land right on our marker, so we need to measure again. And when you measure again, I want you to measure more space, not less. More is better than less. So to do that, let's move down to a different spot. And on this one, because I don't want to get close to my edges, I'm going to have to go about a 1/2 inch in on either side. And that gets it really close to the edge, but we're going to say right here, this one going to this one. That goes from the 0.5 right here all the way to the 5.5. So that is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. So here I'm measuring a total of 5 inches, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 stitches. Let's move down to another one. Yep, these are pretty uniform. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So 18 stitches over 5 inches. Let's come down on this and see what that's going to calculate out to, because we know exactly it's 18 stitches over 5 inches. And this time our stitches per inch, 18 divided by 5, gives us 3.6. So we were kind of close, just guessing, but I don't want to guess. I want to know for sure. With tech editing, you're either right or you're wrong. And it feeds right into my perfectionist scenario. So at, you can see that, look at that, 90. 3.6 stitches per inch for my 25-inch garment gives me 90 stitches exactly at that measurement. And that's what I'm putting on your instructions, and that's what you're going to be telling your stitchers. Now, look at the whole scope of this. We went from, if we had just gone, oh, well, 14 is close enough, it's 14. Our difference would have been that. 3 inches, but 3 inches is like almost a whole inch, or 3 stitches. 3.5 stitches, that's a whole inch difference at the end of the piece. If I'd said it's 15 and 4 inches, 93 or 94 stitches versus 90 stitches. If I match your gauge and you tell me to do this many stitches, it had better equal that distance when I do all those stitches. And if I had done 94, it wouldn't be 25 inches across because my accurate gauge is down here. My accurate gauge is 3.6 stitches per inch, not that. So if my true gauge is 3.6, let's say if we had done 94 stitches, oh wait, what we do is type in 94 and divide that by our true gauge of 3.6 stitches per inch, my final piece would be 26 inches wide, not 25. And that's just on a little piece like that for a sweater. Something much larger like an Afghan, you're talking about an extra 6 inches to a foot difference that could be at the end of that, at the end of the piece. So this is why gauge matters. The little tiny numbers, the difference between 6.25 and 3.6, to me matters. When you're asking me to do your tech editing, I want the most detailed information possible. So as far as gauge goes, that means measuring more and getting it from beginning of a stitch to beginning of a stitch, or beginning of a stitch pattern to beginning of a pattern. And if it doesn't land exactly on that mark, you measure more. So the same goes for the rows, and we can show you that. We can take it in a little bit. I'll bring this down and zoom in. All right, so we're gonna go towards the top of this piece because this particular piece, I have waist cut stitching done accurately up here, but down here at the bottom of the stitch, I had it different. You can see I had 2 V's that sit inside each other, and then it shifts over, and then 2, and then it shifts over. I wasn't doing it exactly right. So I figured that out somewhere around here. Went from shifting to not shifting. All those V's sitting inside each other. So that's what I want to measure. So I'm going to start at the top, again coming down from the top of the piece to about my 1, and I'm going to go again from the bottom of a stitch. I've got that lined up with my 1 mark, and I want to go to the bottom of another stitch, and I'm just going to shift this up so that y'all can see how the stitches line up with my mark on the ruler. So here at the 5 mark, all right, when my 1 is lined up, the bottom of that V is here, and the bottom of the previous V is here. And when my pin is lined up, neither of those hits that mark. And you again could look at this and say, well, that is not that much of a difference right there. But we just saw with the previous example that it really is. When it comes down to the numbers and the sizing of your garments, do you want it to fit or not? You know, it's like, do you want your user to be happy or not? And so we are going to keep going down our ruler until we find a V that ends right at the measurement. Does it happen at 6? Not really. It's below it. Does it happen at 7? It's right there. And trust me. You know, my top one is lined up, and look at that, my bottom one is lined up. So it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches to get a precise and accurate row count on this one. So this one goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Okay, 29 over 6 inches is the right one, and I'm writing that down because if we zoom back out, sorry about the bouncing. If we zoom back out, you can see up here it would have been 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20. All right, so let's look at our math again. 29 stitches over 6 rows is correct. The other options were either 19 over 4 or 20 over 4. So, whoops, that's not right. 29 rows over 6 inches. All right, so trusty calculator, 29 divided by 6 equals 4.8333. It's going to be repeating. 19, and this is rows per inch. 19 divided by 4 would have given us 4.75 rows per inch. And 20 over 4, everybody can do better math than me, that's 5. 5 rows per inch. That's the difference. You're either calculating short, too long, or just right. And if this was a, let's see, this piece right here is like 12 inches long. If you were doing a sweater or a shirt again that was maybe 15 or 18 inches long, then you would take, or I would take this number times 18 inches of what I want my piece to be, times 18 inches. And let's just do these first for fun. So I would be telling you that that particular size, 5 times 18 is 90, is either 90 rows long, or 18 times 4.75, or it's 85.5 rows long, or in reality, when I let all those repeating decimals come into play, 29 divided by 6 times 18, the real piece should be 87 rows. Okay? Not 85 or 86, not 90, 87. Depending on your type of pattern, your type of garment, your type of blanket, whatever it is that you're making, these numbers can get bigger and bigger, the difference between them. And your final piece is either going to be that much more, well, it is going to be that much more off for your user, which doesn't make for a happy user. So that is why when you are measuring gauge, if it doesn't fall exactly on the mark, go bigger. Go big or go home. You know, this is a go bigger kind of situation. If it doesn't hit it right at 4, you go up to 5. And give me these numbers. If 5 was where it matched, you give it to me. You don't calculate this back to 4. Just give me the big one. And I will then be able to get you a beautifully accurate pattern, sized up appropriately. So, once again, I am Emily, your tech editor at Fiat Fiber Arts, and if you would like to use me, definitely go to fiatfiberarts.com and shoot me an email from there, and I will be in touch. So thank you very much. I hope this helped with gauge.